All right, Chavre, this is mamish amazing. This is pure light. First, we're going to learn how to learn. And then the Rebbe is going to shed light on the neshama of the entire Eruvin. Now, for those of us who learned Eruvin, some of these dinim will become more familiar. I'll do my best to be bekitzer, to be short, but to be clear, because we're going to be focusing on various dinim and various mishnayos and various gemaras that we have throughout Eruvin. Okay, so let us begin. With the help of Hashem and with partnership, us Chabad Sola, with Chabad.org, we are learning the Sicha of the Rebbe's Siyum on Eruvin, as is recorded in Sefer Likkutei Shichot, Chelik Yud Aleph, B'Shalach Gimel, page 63, for Project Likkutei Shichot. This is going to be an unbelievable Sicha. There is going to be a certain amount of knowledge, of introductions that we'll have to give to better appreciate the various dinim that we're going to be going through. And there's going to be the first part of the Sicha, which will be a nigla part of the Sicha. And then there's going to be an unbelievable Hasidic inner explanation to all of the halachas that we are about to learn. So without any further ado, the Sicha, which is B'Shalach, is based on a pasuk that we have in B'Shalach, in which the Torah writes, Al Yetzei Ish V'Mekaymer B'Yom HaShvi, that one should not leave his or her place on the seventh day. Now, what is that referring to? So Amru Razal, the sages tell us this is an Eruvin Daf Nun Aleph. And as the Rebbe writes in parentheses, it's brought down in Perush Rashi on the Chumash, that this is not referring to people carrying the manna. Carrying is a whole different malacha of Reitzah, but this is alluding to, and we will call this, according to most opinions, Eyasmachta Elu al Payamama. This is alluding to the rule, not carrying, that one is not allowed to walk 2,000 amas beyond one's Shabbos boundary. This is called the Tchum Shabbos. In other words, says the Rebbe, explaining the Gemara, Hainu, Shemi Pasuk Zeh, that from this verse, Lamdu, we learn Ha'itzur, Lotzeitz, Chutz, L'Tchum, Shalapayim Amma, Min Ha'ir B'Shabbos, that one may not go beyond 2,000 amas, leaving the city with all of the Prati Dinim that we have throughout Masechtas Eruvin, throughout all of the various halachas of Tchumin, but the source of that is based on a pasuk in B'Shalach. Bekitzer, really, we have three shittas. We have the opinion of Rabbi Akiva that takes this pasuk to mean literally in reference to Tchumei Shabbos. Rabbi Akiva holds Tchumin of 2,000 amma is midoraisa, so that's pashut, that's very clear Gemara. However, the other opinions, whether you're going to hold that there is a Tchum Shabbos midoraisa, but not 2,000 amas, whether you hold that there is b'chlal no concept of Tchumei Shabbos midoraisa, it is entirely a din d'Rabbanan. Nevertheless, as we have many times throughout, that there is a concept called a asmachta, that even when something is from rabbinic origin, they lean it on a pasuk in the Torah, and this is the verse. Okay, now Vihine says the Rebbe, B'dinei Tchumin, regarding this law of Tchum, that there is a boundary, there's a limit as to how far may one walk beyond the area in which you acquired your residence when Shabbos came in. Normally, you begin Shabbos in a city, so your city is your residence. Happens to be that halachically one can consider the entire city as 4 amas. Really, this even includes certain areas beyond the city, all part of the halachic city. Beyond that, you measure 2,000 amas, and that's your boundary. So we learn, my friends, at the end of the 4th Perek of Eruvin. In the Gemara, we're going here to Daf Nun Beis Amid Beis. And Vizel L'Shoyin HaMishnah. If a person was trying to make his or her way back into the city, but it's getting dark. Now, if a person was beyond 2,000 amas, outside the city when Shabbos comes in, then your place of residence is out there, and you may not walk 2,000 amas beyond your 4 cubits, and therefore you would not be allowed to enter the city. This person was going for it. This person thought that they will make it back to the city on time. At least the person thought that they will make it within 2,000 amas from the city. Because if a person makes it within the 2,000 amas of the city when it becomes dark, it's considered as if you are already in the city, and then weiter, you're good to go. You can enter your city, you can go to your house. But what happened here was that you realized that when it became dark, when Shabbos came in, you were outside the 2,000 amas. The Tanach says, even afilu ama achas, even if you were 2,001 amas, nothing you can do. So you are beyond the Tchum Shabbos. You have to acquire your place of residence outside the Tchum, and therefore you are bound to be in that location. It says the Tanakama, lo yikones, you may not enter the city. However, Rabbi Shimon, just as a rule, whenever Rabbi Shimon is mentioned in the Mishnah, it's referring to Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he says, afilu chamesh esrei amos, if you are within 15 amos from the city, not beyond 1 amma. If you are even up to 15 amos beyond the 2,000 amos outside the city, we do allow you to enter the city, but you are beyond 15 amos from the Tchum. So says Rab Shimon, she'ein ha'mishoichois mematzim es hamidois mipnei hatoim. They're surveyors who used to measure the Tchum Shabbos. That means in the days of old, people would go during the week, of course, and they would measure with so many detailed halachas that you need to use ropes, and they have to be exactly 50 amas long, and you measure until you reach 2,000 amas, and then you used to put a marker in the ground that said At Kam Tchum Shabbos. That's how people knew when they're leaving the city how far beyond the city limits are they allowed to go for Ashpatzir. So says Rab Shimon that they did not place these marks of the Tchum Shabbos accurately. Really, they would place it more or less, according to some Rishonim, according to other Rishonim, exactly 15 amas shy of the Tchum, which means that they put the markers in a place where really you have either approximately 15 or really accurately 15 amas to go beyond it. Why did they do that? So like Rab Shimon says, mepnei hatoyim, because sometimes there are people who they are going for a walk and they are engrossed. They're engrossed in whatever they're thinking about, whatever they're talking about, and they might not notice and go a little bit beyond the marker of the Tchum. If they would have placed the Tchum marker exactly where it's meant to be, there's a halacha that if someone goes beyond the Tchum Shabbos, they're stuck there until the end of Shabbos. Stuck meaning they can't go beyond 4 cubits. So to prevent that from happening, though their surveyors would either approximate or they would accurately put it 15 amas before the Tchum. So now you have a safeguard for people who toyin inadvertently, mistakenly, they go beyond it. So since we have this concept that the markers are not placed exactly in the right place, now we're gonna understand this halacha to mean not that Rab Shimon says that for sure you have a 15 amas bonus, because really it's part of the 2,000 amas. There is a possibility that you have another 15 amas. So because of that, Chazal were lenient and they allowed you to enter the city. Perush says that Evan, Rab Shimon holds that that when they would measure, surveyors measured before Shabbos. Umesamnin es hamokim, and they would place a siman, like we said, they would leave a marker. Where they were telling you that, this is already the limit, this is 2,000 amas from the city. Says the Tana Rab Shimon, they did not give you a full measure. It wasn't a full 2,000 amas, meaning lohatziv hasimin b'seif alpayim amma. They didn't place it exactly at the real end. Ela mikatzrin asamidah. They would measure a little bit shorter. They would give you a little bit of a shorter measurement. And they would place the marker really before the end of the Tchum, 15 amas. Why? Because of people, right, who would accidentally walk beyond the marker. They might not recognize this marker that had on it written the words At Kan Tchum Shabbos. And sometimes they would go beyond it. Then they would turn around and walk back. And they wouldn't even be mindful of it. So to prevent now, they wouldn't go way beyond the marker. But because that was something that was regular to happen. It was something that could have happened. It's something that happened. So they felt that putting the tchum 15 amas before the real tchum, it covers that area. And again, it's not that we know that for sure, as we'll see later, but there's enough of such a possibility that here, Rav Shimon will hold that we are lenient, the Chazal were lenient, and they tell a person, it's getting dark, you were trying to make it back to the city. Don't think that since you are 1 amma outside of the marker, then you're out. No, you have 15 amas. And therefore, even if a person, when Shabbos came in, when it became dark, they were beyond the tchum. If the person was already within 15 amas from the marker, from the tchum, then Chazal say, according to Rav Shimon, you can go inside the tchum. And once you can go inside the tchum, which means once when Shabbos came in, you were already inside the tchum, then it's tantamount to you already being in the city, amachaya. Then you can go into your house. Because we are saying that really, the chances are that you were already inside the tchum. So nothing wrong is happening here. This is, my friend, the end of Perek Daled. Let's go with Dafim. This mission we have on Daf Nun Beis Amud Beis. Now, the Tam Zeh Shel Rav Shimon, this rule, that this din that we learn on Daf Nun Beis, is alluded to again at the end of the Masechta. In Mamish, in the last Mishnah of the Masechta, which is on Daf Kuf Daled Amud Beis. Furthermore, the ending of the Gemara on Masechtas Eruvin, the Gemara will be explaining this Mishnah, Mamish at the end, on Daf Kufay. So says the Rebbe that the Tam Zeh Shel Rav Shimon Nemer Bo'efen Shel Klal. It's repeated in a general statement. The Mishnah Ha'achreina in the last Mishnah of the tractate of Eruvin, which is the 10th chapter of Hamotzei Tefillin. And here the Rebbe quotes the end of the final Mishnah, that Rav Shimon says, we're going to give context in a moment. And as we will see, at first glance, it's very difficult to appreciate how the statement of Rav Shimon is connected to what the final Mishnah speaks about. It appears that it's speaking about something completely unrelated, and we know that that cannot be. For sure it is related. But here ends the Mishnah. Rav Shimon says that that in the places where the sages were lenient, they were lenient because they were giving you that which is really already yours. What are they referring to? It doesn't say. Hold that thought. That's the second to last statement in the Mishnah. Comma. Then the Mishnah concludes that Chazal were only lenient when whatever might be happening here is a rabbinical violation, but the Chachamim were never lenient whenever there is a biblical violation. Now, this last statement, for those who are learning Eruvin, the last series of Mishnayos is teaching us various laws in which we do differentiate between Mikdash and Medina, between certain activities, actions that may be done in the temple, that may not be done out of the holy temple. Mikdash is the Beis HaMikdash. Medina means anywhere outside of the Beis HaMikdash. Based on a rule that has exceptions, based on a rule that ain't Shvus BaMikdash, that Shvus, meaning rabbinic laws regarding Shabbos, generally don't need to be kept in the Beis HaMikdash. So if you have something that's also midrabanan, then normally that may be done in the holy temple. But something that's also midoiraisa cannot be done in the holy temple. So that's the last line of Rav Shimon. That when we were lenient in the Beis HaMikdash, that's only if there is a Shavus violation. But if there is a biblical violation, then we no longer can be lenient. Now, these two statements are very vague. So now the Rebbe is quoting the end of Eruvin. This is Daf Kufei Amud Aleph, by the end of the Masechta. That Rav Shimon, with this statement, is explaining his rationale behind two, again, apparently different halachas. When we have this second to last statement, quoting his words, that where the sages were completely lenient. It's not that they were lenient. They're just telling you that whatever you think was a question is really b'chlal not a question. They're really giving you what's already yours. That goes, says the Gemara, on the din that we just quoted, on the din that's mentioned at the end of Perek Dalet, on Daf Nun Beis Amud Beis, that Misha Hechshech Chutz L'Tchum, the Chachamim were stringent. They said if you are even only one Amma outside of the Tchum, my friends, too late, you can't go into the Tchum, and therefore you can't go into the city. You got to spend Shabbos out there in the field. Rab Shimon is the one that lenient, and he says that if you are already within 15 Ammas of the Tchum marker, you could enter. So Rab Shimon is explaining himself that this is not a kula, this is not a leniency. It's really yours. Like he explained, that the surveyors would place the measurement of the tchum 15 amas before the real end of the tchum. So really you taka entered your tchum. Because we say you are already in the tchum, and therefore nasnu lecha, they allowed you, they told you can enter. I know the Chol's man, if you are already within 15 amas before the marker of the tchum, you are really already in the tchum. So Rab Shimon Keilu is justifying himself that he's not being lenient. He's just revealing to you that you are taka inside the tchum. If you are within the tchum, then there's no leniency to be able to go home. You already halachically came home, and you can walk from within the tchum to any other area within the same tchum. And so that again, that's the Gemara's explaining the second to last statement in the last Mishnah in Eruvin. The last line in the Mishnah, that we says the Gemara that goes to another din. What other din? A din that's already mentioned here in the 10th chapter. Not in the Mishnah prior, not in this Mishnah. We are learning now Daf Kuf Gimel Amud Beis. That's where the last Kuf Daled Amud Beis. That's where the last Mishnah is. This statement is referring to a din that we learn on Daf Kuf Beis Amud Beis. And let me just give a few words of introduction to the Mishnah on Daf Kuf Beis. Again, the Mishnah is at the end of Eruvin, at the end of Hamaitzi Tefillin, is speaking about the difference between Migdash and Medina. Almost all of these Mishnayos are connected to one theme, based on the rule that Ein Shvus Bamigdash, unless there is an exception. But based on that rule, so various activities that go into a rabbinic violation are not prohibited in the Beis HaMikdash because of the klal Ein Shvus Bamigdash. The Mishnah that we are referring to right now, Daf Kuf Beis Amud Beis, the last Mishnah on the Amid, according to the way we're going to learn it, Gemara Rashi, and many other Rishonim, this Mishnah is not speaking about a Shvus at all. The Mishnah is speaking about as what were to happen if on Shabbos itself, one of the strings of a musical instrument that is being used by the Levium snaps, breaks, gets torn. Fixing the string normally was done by making a knot in the string. Kesher, Kshira, making a knot, especially if it's a Kesher, Shel Kayama, is a biblical violation. A biblical violation may not be done on Shabbos even in the temple. It's Ein Shvus Bamigdash, but a Doiraisa is prohibited. So therefore, what now? A couple of statements. Statement number one: we have the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer. We also have the opinion of the Chachamim, like Rabbi Akiva in Masechta Shabbos Daf Kuf Lamed, that even preliminary actions, preliminary labors, preliminary steps that have to be taken in order for you to be able to do a mitzvah, if the mitzvah itself violates Shabbos, then even the machshirei mitzvah overrides Shabbos. The source of that, again, in Shabbos Daf Kuf Lamed, is asking Mila itself, a bris Mila, if the baby is born naturally and it's on the 8th day, then the bris Mila overrides Shabbos. That's the cut itself that otherwise would have been prohibited. But what about making the knife? What about doing activities that are called machshirei Mila? They are preliminaries. So Rabbi Eliezer is the one that holds that even though it could have been done before Shabbos, but if you did not do it, you are allowed to do it on Shabbos. Over there in Shabbos Rabbi Akiva, as we have over here Chachamim that we find specifically over here, they hold like this, that if it's an activity that you could have done prior to Shabbos, it doesn't overrule Shabbos. But if it's a preliminary activity that you could not have done before Shabbos, then if the mitzvah itself overrides Shabbos, then the action that you need to do to be able to do the mitzvah also overrides Shabbos. Now, how is a musical instrument connected to a mitzvah? When we brought many of the karbanos, part of the carbon was for the Levium to sing. Now we have really a machlokes whether iker shira bepeh or iker shira bekeli. And let's understand pshat in the Mishnah, Daf Kuf Beis Amud Beis, as explains Rabbeinu Yohainason and many others, that our Mishnah is following the opinion that the main mitzvah of playing music is with instruments. So whenever a korban is to be brought and it overrides Shabbos, including in that is that Levium play musical instruments. Now, if they did not prepare the instrument from before Shabbos, and they should have stringed the harp before, then according to our Mishnah, you can't do it. But if it was prepared, it was a functional instrument before Shabbos, on Shabbos it snapped. That's the case of the Mishnah. So now one would argue that you can even make a knot, you can fix, even if it is a biblical violation, because since this is a preliminary that could not have been done before Shabbos it was working, it only broke on Shabbos, it should override Shabbos. That is the opinion of the Mishnah. However, so let's read it inside. The Mishnah says that that you are allowed to make a proper bona fide knot, violating kasher in the Beis Hamikdash, but not outside, because the only reason why we are allowing you to violate a biblical violation is because avodas doiches Shabbos. So therefore, the musical instruments, which is part of the avodah, and even the preliminary, the fixing of it, the preparing of the instrument, is also doiches Shabbos and not outside the holy temple. Avol batchila, which means that if you did not string up the instrument from before Shabbos, so this is not Rabbi Eliezer that would say you still can do it. No. We find the Chachamim argue with Rabbi Eliezer. If it could not have done before, preliminary, yes, doiches Shabbos. If you could have done it before, then kan v'kan osir. That's the Mishnah. The Gemara and Daf Kuf Beis Amud Beis brings a brayso, and the brayso says, "Palig Rab Shimon v'Omer bebrayso hamuvua b'Gemara." Ben Levi, this is really from Daf Kuf Gimel on the top, that Ben Levi shenifseko leinima b'kinoyer, that if on Shabbos a Levite who had a harp that was functioning, but now it tore, it snapped on Shabbos, koishra, the Chachamim say, like they say in the Mishnah, you may tie it, but Rab Shimon says, oinva, you can only make a bow. He's being machmer. He doesn't allow you to do a biblical violation. Making a bow, according to one opinion, Rebbe Yehuda, making a bow and making the knot is the same thing. But everyone else holds that making a knot is what is prohibited on the biblical level. Making a bow, by default, is something that's only us in Midrabanan. In other words, Rab Shimon is being machmed. He doesn't allow you to make a kasher. The Tamoy who mevair b'Mishnah b'Siyum Massechet, so now the Gemara in Daf Kuf Hey is saying that the final statement we have in the last Mishnah on Kuf Daled Amud Beis from Rab Shimon is explaining his stringency. That which we allow you to do is only if it's a rabbinic violation, but to violate a biblical violation, that will never allow you to do. Like the Gemara explains again at the end of the Masechah Daf Kuf Hey, Aniva, making a bow, will never lead you to violate a biblical violation. How can a bow lead you to violate a biblical violation? So when it comes, without going into many details of making a knot or making a bow, there are two things that are very important. One of them is how long will it last? Is it something that can last, whether it is for 7 days, as many places can say, will it last for a long amount of time or not? Another part of bow and knot is, what is your intent? Do you want it to remain for, let's say, the week? When it comes to making a bow, Rab Shimon is of the opinion, not like Rabbi Yehuda, that even if you're going to intend to leave the bow more permanently, it's still never going to be the biblical violation of not being allowed to make a knot on Shabbos. So making a bow, even if that's your intent. So here the Chachamim said that in the Beis Hamikdash you can do it because it's needed. That's according to Rab Shimon, that only the rabbinic is permitted, only a shvus. But kshira, even if you're making a temporary knot, but if you will make that knot permanent, let's speak about intent. If you will leave that for a long time, if that was your intent, then making a knot is a biblical violation. Since the asay l'deichi of chatas, it can lead you to violate a biblical violation, for which if you do it b'shegeg, you bring a chatos, Lo yisharu le'rabbanim. Okay. Notice the second to last and the last clause in the final Mishnah in Eruvin, as it's recorded on the Kuf Dalod Amud Beis, is Rab Shimon speaking about two different halachas that he said. And none of them are right here adjacent. One of them goes back to Nun Beis Amud Beis. One goes to a Mishnah in Kuf Beis Amud Beis. They're not related. V'hakishur, and the connection, shebein Beis Inyanim Elu, so there's a machlekes Rashi Tosfos. Why are they together? So the Rebbe quotes Rashi. So first the Rebbe begins with Rashi. That even though, don't ask me, am I lenient or am I stringent? In other words, on Daf Nun Beis Amud Beis, Rab Shimon was lenient, right? He allowed you, even if you are 15 amas outside of the Tchum you can already go into the city. He's mekel. The Tanach was machmer. When it comes to the din of a string of a musical instrument that snaps on Shabbos, there the Chachamim are lenient in the temple. You can actually make a knot. Rab Shimon is machmer. So Rab Shimon is explaining why one time he's mekel and one time he's machmer. So explains Rashi that afal pi shehi kalti, that I was lenient b'machshech chutz l'tchum. Nevertheless, machmer ani b'ni maskinor, because over there the Hassan. Why was I lenient by the tchum? I really wasn't lenient. If you are already within 15 amas of that mark, of that marker of the tchum, be'emes, you're probably in the tchum anyways. The Hassan mishalcha nasnu lecha. They gave you what's yours, like we explained, because the moshoichos were not mematze nesamidos. Avol kan, but over here, Rab Shimon disagrees with everything we explained in the Chachamim, that because the mitzvah overrides Shabbos, so the preliminary violates Shabbos. No, he says on the Beis Hamikdash, you only may do something that's only prohibited rabbinically. Avol kan lo yitiru el shvus, and not the kesher, and with the detail that even if you don't plan to leave the kesher for a long time, but since you might decide yes to leave it for a long time, a knot might become a Isser Doirais. That's Rashi. The Rebbe quotes Tosfos. Uve Tosfos Kosvu. Okay, this is the last Tosfos in the Amitz. We're making a Siyum Mamish, learning the Gemara, the last Mishnah, the last Gemara, the last Rashi, and the last Tosfos. The Hasam over there, by the din of Daf Nun Beis Amud Beis, Laf Kuluhu, it's not a leniency. Ela Mishalacha Nasnu Lacha. Begam Kan. Oh. And here also, that's the way Tosfos explains, Loi Nasnu Lacha Ela Mishalacha. Tosfos understands that making a bow, according to Rab Shimon, is not a rabbinic violation. That we say it doesn't apply in the Holy Temple. No, Rab Shimon holds that making a bow is b'chlal not prohibited at all. Tosfos gains a lot by saying that, because then Tosfos explains the connection between these two dinim. Just like on Daf Nun Beis, the reason why Rab Shimon says that if you are 15 amos or less close to the Tchum, you can already enter the city, it's not a kula, it's not a leniency that Chazal gave you. You are really inside the Tchum. Nothing is being waived for you. Similarly, Rab Shimon holds, you know why a Levi can make a bow? Because making a bow, b'chlal is permitted. The Haino says Tosfos that Aniva, the Havet Davar HaMuter. So Kalaima, the Rebbe is explaining why Tosfos argues with Rashi, because at least they have this commonality is Rab Shimon was not Machmer, Rab Shimon is not Mekel. Rab Shimon is simply revealing to you what the basic halacha is. If you are within 15 amas, you are already within the Tchum. No heter is being given to you. Making a bow, b'chlal, is not a problem. As we know, with all the details we're not going to get into right now, when you tie your shoelaces on Shabbos, you can make a bow. There's no heter here. It's l'chatchila muter. Now, according to Rashi, it's a lot more problematic, because according to Rashi, it's not that a bow is permitted. No, a bow was waived in the temple. So yes, there is a kula that he gives in the temple, but only for a derabanan and not for a doiraisa, which makes the final statement and the second to final statement less connected. But B'chlal, the Rebbe says, it's not understood. The Shitas Rashi, like we just explained, why is Rab Shimon making statements connecting two dinim that don't appear to have anything in common? Rab Shimon V'hashmiyenu, Rab Shimon has to explain himself that he's machmir in one din, even though he's mekel in another din. Like, what's the problem here? What, do you think Rab Shimon is always machmir? Rab Shimon is always mekel. Every din is a din for itself. The chiyala aladas, that the kula that Rab Shimon gives regarding the din on Daf Nun Beis, regarding the din of Misha Hechshech Chutz L'Tchum, that for some reason potentially should be machayev you also to be lenient when it comes to making a knot on this string that snapped on Shabbos, for Rab Shimon to have to justify himself why he's not as lenient as the Chachamim. So according to Rashi B'chlal, it's not understood. Furthermore, the Rebbe says Ula Perush, Ulafi Perush HaToisves, Bisfaras Rab Shimon, that there is at least more, there is a certain common theme, which is that the Oisai Hatam HaMachayv L'Hakel, Hu HaMachriel HaHachmer Khan, that the same reason why Rab Shimon is Mekel, for the same reason he's Machmed, because all he is doing is he's pointing out that we're not even waiving anything. No kula is being given to you, still kosher. The loy have a leila meimer elamakim that all the Mishnah should have said at the end of Eruvin in Mishnayos was elamakim sheitiru lachachamim. Wherever the sages said something could be done, they're not waiving anything. Mishalachan nasnu lacha. They're giving you what's really already yours, and that, according to Tosfos, explains both dinim. So v'sulei midi, nothing else is needed. Shahadei zehu, that's the whole point of Tosfos. Gam hanoisim tam l'chumra b'nimas kinesh nifsika. So v'lama moisav Rab Shimon, why did Rab Shimon have to add, and this is the siyum of Mishnayos, and to say shaloi hitiru lacha ela mishum shvus? Why is that even needed? Why ve'enoi mistapek b'tam harishan hayisoidi? The way Tosfos explains that mishalchan nasnu ubefrat, that the words that Rabbeinu Hakadosh uses in the Mishnah always are words that I was quoting. Davar katzar. Rebbe uses short words that include in it in Yanam Rabbim. So you should have been more brief. So even according to Tosfos, so there's an added clause l'chayda that's added. We don't need the final clause. Number two, v'gam sarach lahavin, that divrei Rab Shimon elu. This is the Rebbe teaching us how to learn. If you're going to look in the last Mishnah, again in the Gemara, and Daf Kuf Daled Amud Beis, this final statement of Rab Shimon is in the Mishnah that begins with a whole different topic, which will be the third topic that we'll speak about. And now I want to speak about some laws of Kedusha, of Tumah and Tara. In the Holy Temple, we're not allowed to have anything that's Tameh in there, nor is a Kohen allowed to be Metame himself, certainly when he's in the Holy Temple. We're not speaking about a Kohen is never allowed to make himself impure to corpse Tumah, but a Kohen cannot make himself impure to any type of Tumah when he is in the Holy Temple. So the question is, what should one do if one finds a sheretz that is dead in the Holy Temple? B'chlal, when it comes to most creepers, shiratzim, when they are dead, they don't have any tumah. But there are shmoyne shiratzim, the ones that are enumerated in Parsha Shmini, that when they're dead, they give off tumah, and they are av hatamei. If you touch them, you become a rishon. So what happens if there's a dead sheretz in the Beis Hamikdash? So that's the topic of the beginning of the final Mishnah. So Rebbe says that sheretz shenimtza b'mikdash, and there in the Mishnah, just to say that we have two opinions. One opinion is now you can't allow Tumah to stay in the Holy Temple. So just take it out. You can't take it out. If you're going to take the sheretz, you'll become Tameh. So the Tanach there, which is the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan and Broika, says, take your gartel. The Kohen takes one of the big dekona, and he grabs the sheretz through the gartel. Now, just to know a few dinim, the sheretz is an av. The gartel becomes a rishon, and a rishon cannot make a person tamei. The downside is that the gartel becomes tamei. You were matame a holy beged, the beged of a kohen. The upside is that you did not leave the tumah lingering until you found a theoretical better solution. What's the better solution? According to the other Tana, Rabbi Yehuda says, get a tsevis, get tongues. Tongues, we're speaking about a wooden instrument, flat woodenware, don't become tamei, even if there's contact with tumah. With the tongues, you grab the sheretz, so nothing became tamei. Now, the downside of Rabbi Yehuda is that it's going to take you more time to find the wooden tongues. I'm just reading inside the Mishnah. Rabbi Yehuda, not to make something else become tamei. Each one has an up over the other. One, according to the first Tana, Rabbi Yochanan and Broika, you're going to get rid of the tumah quicker, but you're going to make a beged tamei. And according to Rabbi Yehuda, You might have to leave the sheretz longer, but at least when you get it out, nothing else is becoming tummy. That's the final din. So the Rebbe asks, the statement of Rab Shimon, as explained, mamash at the siyum, either referring in part to daf kuf beis, referring in part to daf nun beis, has nothing to do with sheretz. The Imkain asks the Rebbe, havalei l'shanoisam. Rabbeinu HaKadosh should have taught the statement of Rab Shimon, b'smichus mamish la'achas halachas anal, to at least one of the two halachas above. Or even if for whatever reason Rabbeinu HaKadosh wants to end the tractate with this statement, he should have made this into a Mishnah for itself. Oikan al kopanim b'mishnah b'fnei atzmai. And the fact that Rabbeinu HaKadosh included these two statements of Rab Shimon, referring to two separate dinim that we learned, like we said, Daf Nun Beis and Daf Kuf Beis, they all obviously, yes, they're connected to the Mishnah of Sheretz, and how are we to understand that? Gewaldig. Okay, so now let us begin. Right on page 64 on Seif Beis. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu Malachenu sha'ar kol nivudori. Says the Rebbe that v'habiur b'zeh yuven behegdim. That echad mahatamim shemitzvah lachzor bein acher eruvei chatzeros, bein acher shitufei muva'os. We're quoting over here the words of the Tur, the words of the Shulchan Aruch, that it's a mitzvah to make a eruv chatzeros and a shituf muva'os. Just a quick few words explaining what this means. Even though biblically one is allowed to carry from a private domain to another private domain, I can carry from my house to your house, from my house to your yard, from my yard to your yard, etc. Shlomo HaMelech enacted that if you have two different private domains that don't belong to the same ownership, then one may not carry an item from one to the other unless they merge, and there are two types of eruvin. One is called eruv chatzeros, which merges people who share their houses, share a common yard. There's another type of partnership that we make that is called shituf muva'os, and that is really a much larger merging that is done. It's done really nowadays for all of the cities that have city eruvin. The city makes a shituf muva'os, which, by the way, also automatically includes in it eruvei chatzeros, at least by the letter of the law. Parenthetically, there is an inyan also to make an eruv chatzeros, sheloi l'shakeach hatinoikis, people should not forget how to make an eruv, that there is an eruv chatzeros. But anyways, there is a way enacted all by Shlomo HaMelech that will allow one to be able to carry from one private domain to another private domain. Now, when people learn about the dinim of eruvin, normally you never hear that it's a mitzvah to do it. It's an instrument, it's a halachic tool that you could use if you want to be able to carry, let's say you live in an apartment building, from your apartment to a common area. But the Tur and the Shulchan Aruch, they don't frame it that way. They say that it's a mitzvah to make an eruv chatzeros. There is a mitzvah to make a shituf muva'os. Why? Shahu, because what do you benefit from that? It gives you a lot more freedom on Shabbos. It allows you to carry more from here to there. It's going to be for your benefit, right? Here it's going to allow you to walk around, or for you to bring all of the items that you need in order to have a better meal. And all of that is a mitzvah, because there's a mitzvah, wow, that you should declare Shabbos as a day of pleasure, and therefore any halachic action that you can take that will permit more things on the Shabbos, particularly that it's going to help you eat better, that's a mitzvah. It's part of Einik Shabbos. That is what the Tur writes concerning an eruv chatzeros and a shituf muva'os. So says the Rebbe that logically the same applies to a tchum, to eruvei tchumen, or muven shekamoiken hu b'nidan didan, that shemishum Einik Shabbos, because of the concept that we are supposed to have pleasure on Shabbos, mitzvah lihimotzei b'toich tchum ha'ir. It's a mitzvah for you to make an effort to begin Shabbos while you are already inside the boundaries of the city, mamish, in order for you to be able to walk around properly, etc. And also, when you're taking Shabbos, when you're kleine shvisa in the city, you can walk in the city, and the parentheses uba alpaim ama michutzala in all of the directions. Unlike if a person takes out Shabbos outside the tchum of the city, it's very uncomfortable. Imagine spending Shabbos in a place that halachically you can't even walk to the city. That ever writes here in footnote 14, you're even more limited than you not having an Eruv Chatzeros. In other words, the Rebbe is making here a kal v'chomer, that if the Torah says that it's a mitzvah to make an Eruv Chatzeros, certainly it's a mitzvah for you to begin Shabbos inside the Tchum. Being out, back inside the Sicha, v'zeu ha'hepech do'oinik Shabbos. So now Gevaldik. We're beginning to explain the Mishnah Daf Nun Beis Amud Beis, the end of Perik Dalet. That if a person who was on a trip, they're trying to make it back to the city, it's getting dark, they didn't make it, they barely made it to the Tchum, and Rav Shimon is lenient, and he says, even though you think you're 15 amos outside, you're already inside. Rav Shimon is not saying that you may enter. Rav Shimon is saying, and therefore you must enter. Mutal olav gam inyan shel chiyuv, page 65, likones l'toich for you not to give continuity to having a lack of pleasure for the whole me'es la'es of Shabbos, which is what will happen if you'll be stuck outside the city. It's a very important detail. In other words, it's not that Rab Shimon is saying that you have an option, but we are looking to be matir for you to be able to say that you took in Shabbos within the boundary, because then you can have Oinek Shabbos, and if you'll be out, then you won't have Oinek Shabbos. Now, says the Rebbe Gevaldik, Al pi zeh yesh loimer, sheshitas Rab Shimon on Daf Nun Beis Amud Beis. That says that again, 15 amas, you can walk in. The din zeh noivas min nekuda klolis. That din is coming from a very general, let's say, ashas sugya. There's a very broad question, and that is, if you have to weigh and pick two opposing virtues, one is ribui kamus, one is quantity, all right? If we're speaking about a violation, one is that you will frequently be violating something. That's one side. The other side is that you will one time violate something that's a lot more severe, something that is of echos. Ribui kamus versus less miyut of echos. Quality, quantity, but that's stam quality, quantity. Quantity beribui and quality in a small measure. Which one is machriya? Which one is more important? And here we're speaking this all, it's amazing, in the negative. In other words, it's a lose-lose. The question is, which one is worse? So that Rab Shimon holds everywhere that ribui kamus is machriya goydel ha'echos, even though in quantity it's much less than the kamus. What are we talking about? It speaks out the Rebbe. How is that connected to the question of Chachamim and Rab Shimon, whether you can walk in the Tchum even though you think you're 15 amos outside of it? So says the Rebbe, lefi hanal tamei shel Rab Shimon, that he holds yikanes the way the Rebbe explained. Yikanes isn't only that you may enter, but in parentheses, that you must enter. Hu bichdei, if you won't enter, then you will continuously violate the lack of oineg. Now, oineg, that's from Divrei Kabbalah, right? It's from Nach, the Korasal Shabbos oineg. If you're going to enter, now, if taka you were outside the tchum, if we were to know that for sure, then you entering, right, you will violate through an action, right, by doing an action, breaking the tchum, the Rebbe says is more chamur, because it's sourced, as we began the Sicha, on the pasuk of Aliyah ishmim kaimai, and that's much more severe. It's a echos dika, more severe violation, more than just you not having Oinek Shabbos. So it's gavaldik. So here, what are you going to do? Now, one thing is clear, my friends. No one is, God forbid, saying that you are allowed to break tchum to have more pleasure. God forbid. What we are saying here is that really, like Rab Shimon explains, that the people, they're surveyors, they used to put the tchum before the real tchum. How much? Approximately 15 amas. So really, before Rab Shimon's psak, there's like a question mark. Oh, so why were Chazal lenient? Why are we allowed to rely on the mitzias that surveyors did de facto? They were a little bit stingy when they measured, allowing a little bit of leeway of around 15 amas. We are doing that because what will we benefit? We will benefit that you won't be violating the whole Shabbos, a lack of oinik. Ribui kamus is machria miyut echos. Now, miyut echos means because going beyond the tchum, in our case, going inside the tchum is a one-moment activity. You went beyond the tchum. In our case, from outside the city to within the city, it's a one-time violation. Not having oinig is something that's going to continuously happen. Gavaldik. Ribui kamos miyut echos. There's another gavaldik news that the Rebbe adds to that. We learn throughout. We even have this towards the end of Eruvin, that we also differentiate between an active violation versus a passive violation. You not entering the Tchum Shabbos, you sitting out there in the field, even though you are violating the lack of Einig, but it's a passive violation, which is also less severe. You going beyond the Tchum is an active violation. The sheet of Rab Shimon that the Ribui Kamos is machria miyut echos, right, is even when the violation of Ribui Kamos is done passively. The violation of breaking the Tchum Shabbos is done actively. Still, the importance for you not to violate the whole 24 hours passively. Oinek Shabbos, that gives that side more koyach, which is why Rab Shimon is lenient. That means if, again, the last line in the column, it's more chamor, right? HaChamor Yosem Isa Hashvasas Oinek Shabbos, which will happen Likkutei Shichot b'makom shvi sasoi, in the parentheses, even though it's only being violated passively, Shu b'shev al taisa, b'chol zeh, nevertheless, soivet Rab Shimon, that you should do a one-moment theoretical violation. Rab Shimon is poskening that you are not violating, because that we can rely on the fact that the surveyors did not put it in an accurate place. But yeah, why are we giving you that heter? It's a heter that Rebbe is learning. It's a heter because kamos is machriya. Yekones, because hayoy sheknisa zul tchuma shalir, einay oise iser. Even if there would have been an iser, only berega haknisa, mashenken, if you would be shehi yasoi chutz l'tchum, so then hadeiza iser nimshach b'chol rega v'rega shenimsa sham. And according to Rab Shimon, v'riboy kamos lidatli shel Rab Shimon, even again gavaldik riboy kamos passive violation is more important for you to avoid that, even if what you are doing goes into a one-time active echos violation. That's the real rationale behind Rab Shimon. Once you have this, now we will see how everything is connected, including how this is connected with the Mishnah of Sheretz. Okay, page 66, Seif Gimel. Beautiful. Says the Rebbe V'hinei al pi hanal, based on the above, that the Tamei Shel Rab Shimon and Daf Nun Beis Amud Beis is the Sfira Lei Yekones Hu Lefi Shenibui Hakamus Machriya Soechos. Now Yuvan will understand Hakishur Shebein Beis Haklalim, right? The final Mishnah, the Siyum of Mishnah is Daf Kuf Daled Amud Beis She'amar Betam Beis Halachos. First, he says, "Aklal da mokem sheitiru lacha chachamim mishulacha nasnu lacha." Then the final statement in the Mishnah, mamish the same in the Mishnah, that shleitiru lacha elo mishum shvus, regarding the nima, right, the musical string that snapped on Shabbos, explains the Rebbe. Hine beis ha'ifana metikor akinor, the two options that you have regarding fixing the musical instrument, which is either like the chachamim hold in the Mishnah, that you are actually allowed to make a kesher kshira, or Rab Shimon's opinion, who's more chamur, you can't make a knot, you can only make a bow. So the Rebbe explains what's behind that. Yesh b'chol echad mehem chaymer, each one has a chumrah she'eino b'zulasi. Explains the Rebbe. HaChaymer b'kshira, the problem of making a natu is the asila deichi of chatos. It's a more a qualitative violation. Now, again, we're not saying that you are making a kesher shel kayama for people to learn the Gemara, but like the Gemara says at the end of Kufay, it could lead you to a chiyuv chatus, because when you make a knot and your intent is to leave it there permanently, then this is a biblical violation. That is, the Rebbe writes in parentheses, there is a chomer of echos. So that's the downside with making a knot. Ma she'en kein aniva, if you make a bow, she'en mozelo d'Rabbanan, right? You are violating a rabbinic law. Okay, we're not learning Tosis. We're learning the Rebbe is learning here at Ashi. Because a bow, by definition, doesn't last long. Doesn't last long. It will get unbowed, and therefore anything that doesn't last, for whatever the halacha is of lasting, I know there's all different shitas, we quoted the shita of a week, then you're not violating anything biblically. Well, that would lead everyone to say, so make a bow. Omnon says that Rebbe mitzad ze atzmai, but on the other hand, there is a problem with making a bow. What's the problem? Since a bow by definition is not something that stays, so therefore yitztarech minastam, it's very probable that you're going to have to do it many times on Shabbos. You're going to make a bow. He's going to continue to play the musical instrument. The bow doesn't stay strong. It doesn't stay knotted. So it's going to get undone. So again, you're going to make a bow. Again, you're going to make a bow. You're going to be violating many violations. If you're going to make a bow, you're going to violate kamos a lot. If you make a kesher shel kayama, you only make it once. The echos is worse, but that's it. But you won't continuously violate. The nimsa shegam pisroinish al she'elazu, whether you should make a kesher, a knot, or whether you should make a bow, that's really l'chu'ura dependent in which one is more powerful. When you have to make a decision, which side will overweigh the other, kamos or yechos. Now we understand the dilemma that Rab Shimon has. Now we see that one din does contradict the other. It's beautiful. The nimsat comes out. After Rab Shimon taught us his din on Daf Nun Beis, that Yikonesh, you have to enter. Why? Because Rab Shimon says that if you have to pick Kamus Echos, Kamus will win. Hakamus Machnas. So now Rab Shimon really has to explain himself, because now we have a kasha on Rab Shimon. Rab Shimon should have been the one that says make and not. You are one time making a violation, but it's only one time. And you are not going to continuously make a bow, which is asur midrabanan. Harei asfaron meiseres shegam bedina shel nima sakina yitztadeit. Rab Shimon should have cited to be matir dafke by making a knot. Like we explained, when you make a knot, there is less kamos violation. It's a one-time violation. Not making a bow, like the Rebbe says, because then you will probably have to make it many times over. So now we understand why we need the last line in Mishnayos and Eruvin. Rab Shimon is explaining himself now. That says Rab Shimon that even though yes, I leaned leniently when it comes to violating Tchum. Tchum Shabbos is more stringent than Oinig. For you not to have a more repetitive violation of Oinig, even though Oinig in itself is not qualitatively as chamur as Tchumen, nevertheless, here I'm going to be machmer regarding the echos of Kshira. I will never allow you to violate one time something that has a echos dika violation, which is a doiraisa. Why? Here he says another important rule. And that qualifies this whole svara of Rab Shimon throughout Shas, that ribui kamos is machriya echos. Let me just say it out by heart. Ribui kamo machriya echos is if the kamos and echos are either both biblical or both rabbinic. They are both on the same level. Even in rabbinic, you can have something that's considered qualitatively more prohibited and less prohibited. Same thing midoiraisa. Midoiraisa, right? Something that you punish with skila, something that you punish with malchus, without skila. if they're both on that same world, same level, then Rab Shimon holds that the Ribui Kamus is Machria Echos. But Rab Shimon is explaining himself. But if there is a question of Doirais or Derabanan, which is a not Doiraisa violation, bo rabbinic violation, here Rab Shimon says, I will always opt for you to only violate Shabbos Midrabanan. By the way, that's only for the temple, as we explained. Let's read it now inside. Second line here in the column, that keshegam ha'echos is at least like the kamus, meaning they're both a shvus, meaning they're both midrabanan. Zoy meres sheklal zeh shekamus machria es echus is einoi elo b'makoim sheshteyem shayches l'sug echad shel isur. Either both of them are besug of Isur D'Oraisa, or they're both the Isur D'Rabbanan. Masha'enkin, when it comes to the din on daf kuf beis on the base, you got to fix the musical instrument. You're allowed to do that. But one way is by violating the D'Oraisa. The other way is the Rabbanan. That weighing D'Oraisa, the Rabbanan will always trump Kamus and Echos. And we will always minimize the Isur D'Oraisa. Like we do in our case, only make a bow, so holds Rab Shimon. Right? Again, even though that you can argue that you don't have to make a kesher shel kayama, but it might turn out to be a kesher shel kayama. And va'adarabba ha'echos shel da'oraisa, yes, even though it's only a one-time violation, that will be machras, and it will allow you to violate many derabbanans. Make a bow, and an hour later make a bow again, but you did not violate a doiraisa. And then Eva beautifully, page 67, brings Arai and Nigla, again, that even though normally the klal is that riboy hakamus is machria, even a miota echos, but that's only if they are both either doiraisa or both derabanan. The moment it's doiraisa derabanan, not violating doiraisa is always going to be what will decide the halacha. Where do we find that? So he brings from the Chaim, from Simen Shin Chav Ches is all of the dinim of a chayla on Shabbos. So the Alter Rebbe writes like this: Hoya chayla. Sheyesh v'isakana, chayla sheyesh v'isakana is someone for whom you machal Shabbos, and he needs meat. So what do we do? Sheichtin loy, shecht the animal for him. Now hold on. Isn't shechting an isur doiraisa? Yeah, but he's gonna die. He's a chayla sheyesh v'isakana. But hold on, if life overrides almost all of the halachas in the Torah, it overrides Shabbos. So why don't we say, let him eat non-slaughtered meat, let him eat nevela. At least you won't have to shecht. The ein oimrim, if there is such an option, nachilenu nevela. Shehi isur lav. And why is nevela better than shchita? Because nevela is taka prohibited, right, non-kosher meat. But if a person, God forbid, eats a nevela, they get malchus. If a person shechts an animal on Shabbos, if you do it b'shoigig, chayv chatas, the mesa the chayv skila, the chayv kones, which is more be'echus, it's a greater violation. Va'al mechalel all of Shabbos isur skila. Now they're both biblical. Nevela is also d'oraisa, chilul Shabbos is also d'oraisa. But Alter Rebbe is asking, why are we saying shecht? And Alter Rebbe answers this same nekuda, because if the option would be to feed the chayla nevela, then for every kazayas that he eats, he's violating again and again and again another isur d'oraisa. So nevela compared to Shabbos, nevela is not the echos dik as severe. V'haraya, the punishment is not as severe, but he's not going to violate it once. There's going to be a riboy kamos of violations. He's going to be oiver al kol kazayis ukazayis. Masha'enkin b'shchita. By shchita, which is what we're opting, eina oisa ela isur echad. There is a one-time violation. Afal pi shehu chamur. So again, if we have to break something, we would rather break one echus because it's a miut versus violating something which, even though it's not as severe, but you're going to have to violate it many times. Okay, so if that's the case, in other words, the Alter Rebbe is paskening like the underlying svara, the yisoid of Shitas Rab Shimon throughout. But here the Alter Rebbe continues. What happens if a chayla needs to have warmed up wine? Now, cooking on Shabbos is an isur d'oraisa. a goy touching the wine renders the wine into either yayin nesach or at least yayin stam. Yayin stam is an isur derabanan. So writes the Alter Rebbe, but if wine has to be warmed up, so that says the Alter Rebbe, don't allow the goy to touch it. The Jew should fill up the pot, and who should warm it up? The goy should turn on the fire. Then the Alter Rebbe continues, hold on, if the goy is going to be the one involved in turning on the fire, he might come to touch it. Now, if the wine is already cooked, then there's no problem if a goy touches the wine. But if the goy is going to be involved here in making the fire and warming it up, what happens if he touches the wine before he warms it up? And if that happens, what will you violate an Isur D'Rabbanan? So the Alter Rebbe says, still, a goy should warm it up. Even if the goy touches it, worst case scenario, there's only an Isur D'Rabbanan. So in other words, here we're going to point out that there's also a ribui kamos and a miut echus, but here the Alter Rebbe wants, even if there's going to be many times you drinking yayin stam, which is a violation beribui of bekamos, but that will not trump a one-time cooking isur. Let a Jew cook it, so one time he put on the fire, and there won't be yayin nesach. We don't say that the ribui kamos is machriya. No, a goy has to light the fire. Because here, the ribui kamos, beautiful. The ribui kamos is, in worst case scenario, you're going to violate many times the isur d'rabbanan of yayin stam. The option of a Jew lighting the fire, which will take away the violation, beribui bekamos, but it's going to lead you to one time violating an isur da'iraisa. A one-time da'iraisa has to be avoided, even if it's going to bring you to a ribui bekamos. Beautiful. Shadafka, if it's kamoise shalo isur d'navelam, if it's either you're going to shecht on Shabbos or you're going to eat nevela, a doiraisa is going to be violated. Since it's both doiraisa, harei hariboy boy chamira tvei me'echos so isur skila shel shchita b'Shabbos. So we conclude that eating many times nevela is worse than one time shechting on Shabbos. Because ribui hakamus is machriya. Masha'enkem when it comes to the isur shel stam yenom, which is the rabbanon shegam oifanoi hu beribui hakamus ki oise isur b'chol shia v'shasiya. Even though that if the guy will touch the wine before it's cooked, you won't violate once yain stam. You're going to violate it to every time you drink. Nevertheless, machriya ha'echos da'iraisa es ribui hakamus the rabbanon, which is why the guy should put on the fire. And a Yid should never violate an Isur Doiraisa. And that's the Rab Shimon's justification, and needed justification, why these two dinim don't contradict each other, even though you would have thought that they do. Now, Dalid, now, move on Gam Hatam, that Shahapiska of Rab Shimon Omer, the ending of Mishnah is, as we mentioned, why was Rabbeinu HaKadosh, why did he include that in the Mishnah that begins with the laws of a sheretz? And now, at least, why not? So the Rebbe says that the whole machlokes between Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroika that we mentioned, which is that the kohen grabs the sheretz with his gartel, versus the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda that you have to go and get a wooden pliers, a wooden tongues, that is really the same machlokes. Whether kamus, what's the kamus? If you're going to get wooden tongues, the sheretz will remain beriboy hazman inside the temple. So that's one. On the other hand, whether that will be what we have to avoid the most, or echus. What's the echus? The echus is making another keli in the Beis Hamikdash tummy. The goydel ho'in atzmai machriya v'zelo sheina Mishnah. Never quoting the Mishnah. Sheretz shlim to the Mikdash. Kohen might see a behem yonoi. The kohen takes it out with his sash, with his gartel. Why? Shaloi lahashois es hatuma. These are the words of Rabbi Yochanan ben Beroika. In order for the tuma not to linger, in other words, we are preventing tuma being in the temple for a longer amount of time. Kamus. Rabbi Yehuda says, take it out with wooden tongues. Shaloi lerabois. These are his words. Not to make more things tummy. That's an echus dike isur. Not adding more things, time is kamus. Another minute. If another keli becomes tamei, then you are adding more tuma. That's an echos issue. In other words, this Sfaras Plutasam what's the underlying the machlekes between Rabbi Yochanan ben Broik and Rabbi Yehuda, the Mar Savar that Shehuye Tuma is Adif. Adif means that it's worse. We want to prevent Kamus. If you want to prevent Kamus, then get it out the sooner the better. Be'echus, you're making something else Tameh, something has to give. We're going to do what's best, upholding the virtue of Kamus. Umar Savar, that of Fushe Tuma, that adding into Tuma, which is Echus, that trumps, that is more important. And even if you're going to prevent that from happening, that will cause the Sheretz to remain in the temple for a longer amount of time. Echus is Machriya Kamus. So since this is really the underlying Svara, this is amazing, between Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi and
they had a guy parked like this, and there were no spots.
I'm sorry? And that's why Dafkin, this Mishnah, does Rab Shimon come and he explains why the din and Daf Nun Dalet, Daf Nun Beis, doesn't contradict his din and Daf Kuf Beis, because really it's all connected to the same Svara. Gewaldig. And now, Atkan de Nigla, and now let's begin. Hey, Ulavayir, B'derech Efsher, Hashaychus, the Shnei HaKlolim Shal Rab Shimon. These two rules. Again, Doraisa de Rabbanon, Doraisa always trumps. But before that Ribui Kamus is Machriya, even a Miut of Echos, the Hevdol Benem, and the difference between them, Al Pi Pnimius on Yanim. Al Pi Zeh, Yisboir, through enlightening this whole sugya, after properly understanding it, Al Pi Pnimius, will also understand better Tam Noisav B'zeh Sherab Shimon Soivid Shebemakim She'efsher Lahatil She'ikonis B'Chazor L'Techat Chum, that wherever there's a possibility, as he explains, the surveyors didn't put it accurately, then Rab Shimon Dafke will side with that halachically. He wants us to be matir, allowing the person to be able to enter back into the city. Daf, page 68 here in Likkutei Shichot. So says the Rebbe Mevur B'Kama Mekaymis. Shemeleches ha'itza, that the melacha of transferring from one domain to the other, he ikran shalalametes melachas. This is really the ikir, the neshama of all of the melachas. The hine isa b'medrash, it says in the medrash that sheshal min echad mi Rabbi Akiva, that a heretic once asked Rabbi Akiva that im kidvarecha, if it's like you, that what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is machabed the Shabbos, including God doesn't break the Shabbos, so Al Yeshiv Baruch is, how can God allow for winds to blow? The winds are carrying things from here to there. Va'al Yored Bakshamim, how can rains fall? Yeah, transference. Va'al Yatzmiach Ba'esav, how can God allow for vegetation to grow? Right? That's Zoireya. Or that's helping Zoireya. The Heishav Lloyd, Rabbi Akiva answered, Mashal Me'edo V'hoitza, that if you are in one reshus, if you are in one domain, ain't sort of chedav loitza. You don't need an edav. You can carry in your reshus hayachid from one end to the other. So being that in your domain no edav is even needed, so answers Rabbi Akiva, kach kol ha'olam shalohu, the whole world belongs to God. So therefore God can carry. Now this doesn't make sense, because the heretic, didn't only ask about those parts of nature, which is all God, that, so to say, appears to be God violating the prohibition of transferring. He also spoke about the grass growing. The grass growing has nothing to do with domains. You're not allowed to plant grass or grow grass in your reshus hayachid. That b'tshuvas shel Rabbi Akiva, only mituretzes raka kusha b'inyan malachas hayitzom reshus l'reshus. However, kol shar hamalachos, all the other malachos, at least superficially, einam teluis b'yitzos v'reshus l'reshus. And Rabbi Akiva B'chal did not address that. So we must say no. That shemeleches hoitzoi anakude hoikris b'chol meleches Shabbos. Behi hayisoid v'hashoydes shemimenu mistafid kol avos meleches. All of the avos and all of the toldes and all of the shvusans that are banan. It's all coming from, as we'll explain, the concept of the isur of hoitzah. And therefore, once Rabbi Akiva explained, in parentheses, because the whole world belongs to God, okay, now let's explain why are we saying that All of the violations of Shabbos, the Rabbanan always told us, Shvusin, the Rabbanans, they all are just an extension of the concept of the Isur Hoitzah. We'll explain that in a moment. This also answers this concept that everything really is rooted in the Isur Hoitzah, that Lahaschalasa Shal Masechta Shabbos. The beginning, my friends, I think is the first 7 chapters. Not just the first, the Mishnah. It's all about Hoitzah. And actually, in parentheses, in Perek Klal Gadol, right on the Mishnah Daf Ayin Gimel, where we did finally Rabbeinu HaKadosh writes the Arbaim Chasar Achaz. The last one is Hoitzah, and the Masechta begins with Hoitzah. First, Rabbeinu HaKadosh should have began Masechta Shabbos writing the first Mishnah, writing all the malachis. And the Mishnah it's Hazoireya. Then it's HaChodesh, even though that's out of order. And then he should have explained it, like all of the Mefarshim, like the first Tosfos speaks out. So the Rebbe says, Al-Pi Pnimius, that's the answer. Now, why is it that so? So says the Rebbe, that in Yonah Shul Shabbos La Hashem, Shabbos La Vayim. That's the pasuk we have in Yisrei. Yom Tiv, as the Gemara tells us in Psachim, is Chetzioi LaHashem and Chetzioi Lachem. The Shabbos is Kula LaHashem. What does that mean? It's Kula. Now, literally, it means Shabbos is all for God, and on Yom Tiv, some of the day you should spend for yourself. But what it means really is, Hainu she'ingen mitzvahs hashvisa b'Shabbos hu, the whole inner purpose of us resting on Shabbos is, kidei, in order, the Rebbe is quoting the words of the Chinuch, l'kavoya b'nafsheisenu, to establish in our souls, our emunah, in the recreation of the world. In other words, that He is Baruch, that God Almighty, the Exalted One, Bara So'ilim created the world in the 6 days of creation, and He rested on the 7th day. And Va'asher Kain Gam Achshem, and therefore now also, as we learn in Chassidus, that creation is continual. Hu Bara So'ilim, God is creating in the present. Tamid Ma'ayin Liyesh. During the 6 days of the week, God is creating the world, and on Shabbos, the Rebbe says that creation no longer happens through divine speech. Shoyves Mahadiver Das Saram Amoros, and Vahamshachas Achais B'Shabbos, as we learn in Chassidus, as the Alter Rebbe says in Likkutei Shichot, is coming from the level of God's thoughts. Speech completely stops. In other words, coming back to the Chinuch, since God is continuously creating the world, is Hu Yisbarach. He is the only ruler, Hashalat HaYechidi Ba'olam. V'hu kulay tachas reshus, and everything in the world is under God's reshus, under God's supervision, under God's specific divine hashgacha pratis. Hagam she'isavu sa'olam. The word olam comes from the word a concealment, hell and behesed. You can mistakenly think that the world is running by the laws of nature. And there isn't a singular balabas to this palace. A person, God forbid, can think that there are different powers ruling the world. And there's another Rishus of Ran Tuma. That's a mistake. When we keep Shabbos, when we keep the halachas of Shabbos, obviously we got to keep it because we have to keep it. But this also has another effect, is nikva, this will establish, this will make firm, this will be koiveya, the emuna, and the knowledge of the truth, which is shekol ha'olam kulai rishus achasi, which is rishus hayachid, liyechidei shaloylam. What's the nekuda of the whole Shabbos is to reaffirm and to experience more the emes that there's only one rishus. Carrying mirashus l'rishus means that you are living in a mindset where there is a rishus other than the rishus of the Eibishter. And Shabbos, particularly Shabbos, remedies this erroneous thinking. If in the negative, if a person breaks the Shabbos, number one, the person weakens his or her own emunah, God forbid. And number two, the person strengthens the concealment of the world and the mistake that there are Torah Shuyos chas v'shalom, which is the concept of carrying out from the Rishus HaYachid into a Rishus HaRabbin. Taking it out from the Rishusay of the Yachid. Nimsa, comes out, and now the Rebbe says, that what? That kol ha'olam kulei shaloi, the mekiven, that shalagabe yisbarach lo yitachin shum helam v'hester ala mitzvahs hametzias. For God, there is never a concealment for the truth, which is that all of the worldly things, including what we call Ra, all of it is part of God's reshus. And furthermore, the Rebbe writes in parentheses that v'soif gam lamata tizgalo ha'emes, that will happen la'asid lavi, as it says in the Midrash that la'asid, if a person is going to go to lilkoi ta'ena to pick a fig on Shabbos, the fig itself is going to shout out and say, "Oops, it's Shabbos." Hainu shagam ha'olam atzmi. That means that in the future the world itself will sense the emes, the yoid, and it will testify she'ein ba'olam elo echad. And therefore, since you don't have this whole underlying problem of transferring, there's no other malacha of Shabbos, even though externally they don't appear to be connected. And that's why Rabbi Kiva answered all of the questions of the heretic. Oh, this is a gavaldik chevra. Creation is divided into three categories. We're speaking about creation in this world. When you go to the higher worlds, there's only two things. There's Kedusha and Sitra Achra. The novelty, as the Alter Rebbe says in Tanya, of this world is that here we have three. And these are connected to the three domains of Shabbos. Number one, Sug Shalinyoni Kedusha, which means that you avoid the bahemi ba'oifen, the ba'asei toiv, rishus hayach, and yechidush olegam. There's the part of this world that is mamish our avoida, all of the holy activities that we do. Number two, base suk shal yonira udvarim asurim, the world that's called in Kabbalah the Turei, the Pruda, the mountains that are separated. Sho'oifen avoida bahem, when you have things that belong to that part of the world, we engage with it by not doing it, by not engaging. We stay away from that. But now we have the Gimel. What is Gimel? Sug, Shel, and Yoni Rishus. There is a in-between in Yoni Rishus, the permissible, not a mitzvah, not prohibited, Rishus. Shehei memutza, bein mitzvah le'isur. Now, how are we to engage in Yoni Rishus? Says that ever there are two ways. Either Kaddish atzmacha b'mutar, even though it's mutter, don't do it. Number two, engage with it in a way where you elevate it to Kedusha. Beis laha'aloisam v'lasoisam Kedusha alidei kol masechel l'shem shamayim v'chol derechecha b'eyu. And v'dugmasam, now that Rebbe says, now you understand why in the halachas of Shabbos we have different reshuyas. You have a chatzir, shabay kama diyarim oimavui, karmelis uchedoime, so the Reshus HaYachid represents the avoid of Kedusha. The Reshus HaRabim, Al-Pi Primis Yanim, represents the other side that we have to stay away from. And all of the Reshoyas that we learn about, the Karmelis, which is the Chatzeros and the Muva'os, beautiful. They represent this third area of Reshus. Now we'll understand the inner meaning of making an Eruv. That the Aliyah Eruvei Chatzeres Vishutafei Muvais, like we quoted before from the tour, that it's a mitzvah to make an Eruv Chatzeres. It's a mitzvah to make a Shituf Muvais. What are you doing? You are making them into a bona fide Reshus HaYachid. Al Pipninius, it's Meidedik what you're doing. You're bringing that into the Reshus of the Yachid. You are elevating it up. You are doing number base, the second option within Yoni Reshus. Al Pisa Muven Sheruvei Tchumen. The Eruvei Chatzeros really have the same Nekuda in a different way, as we'll explain. Hagdalas Reshus v'Tchum Ha'isha Yisraeli. We want to make bigger the domain of a Yid, meaning the domain of Kedusha. Shemitzad Atzma Mitzvah Samasi B'Kamusa. By the way God created the world, again, there's mitzvah, which goes until a point. Reshus, without our Avodah, is not part of that. But through our avodah, right? Va'asiyas ha'eruv, when we merge the reshus into kedusha, we make larger the reshus hayachid, And through that, he misgadeles umisracheves. You make it bigger and wider. Let's go back now to the final Mishnah, and what was the first? What did we learn in the beginning? That I wanted to know, why are we juxtaposing one with the other? Why are they connected? Especially the Periscope, like we pointed out. That Aleph, that Mokaim Sheitiru Chachamim, that Nun Beis Amad Beis, Nishol Lacha, Nasnu Lacha. With that speaking about Tchumei Shabbos, right? Number two, the din that we learned on that Kuf Beis Amad Beis, the string that broke in the instrument of the Levi in the Beis Hamikdash, Shelo Yitiru Lacha Ela Mishum Shvus. So the Rebbe says, She Yisoidai, Shel Hamaduber Bai. What's the yisoid of all malachis? All the lamates malachis is, like we explained before, the concept of not transferring mirashus l'rashus. B'shneim nekuda achas mishutefes kanal. They both have this common theme, which it's all about. It's all about not taking something, not engaging in the rashus harabim, and whatever might be permissible, the inyan rashus to include it, to make an eruv and to include more into the tzad of kedusha. Ubefrat ki atzad hashav beit chumen ushvus misbate gam bekamus ve'echos shel chilukei deis v'negei l'dineim. Al pinigla, this is a very important piece over here. By tchumen, we mentioned this quickly in the beginning, we really have three shittas. Number one, gam al paim amas doiraisa. That's shittas Rabbi Akiva. Beyond that, you may not walk midoiraisa. And taka, the source that we began the sikha with, according to Rabbi Akiva, is taka, the source midoiraisa. Then we have the option number two, which is the way that Rambam paskins, for example, that 12 mil is taka midoiraisa. The 2,000th amma, that's only midrabanan. And number three, which is that the entirety of tchumen is only midrabanan, says the Rebbe that we find a similar three-way approach when it comes to what we call the shvus prohibition, which is a generic word that's used b'negei Shabbos and Yontif. Number one, kol inyani shvus hein min ha-Torah, as many understand. In other words, the Torah says in Mishpatim Tishbois, rest. The Torah didn't explain what that means. So when Chazal told you, don't do this because that's going to disturb your rest, it's not a rabbinic law. It's them expounding and clarifying what God means when he said Tishbois. Number two, yeshnam shavusim that are takem midoiraisa, but there are other shavusim that are derabanan. And then you have another approach that all inyani shvus is only midrabanan. It says tishbois. We began the sikha. It says al yetzi ishma mekaymai. That's called an asmachta. In other words, you have three different reshuyos. You have three different approaches to shvus. They all correlate one with the other. Zayin. Amnon be'emes says the Rebbe that even though everything is rooted in this concept that really there's one reshus, and we have to expand God's reshus out. In other words, we have to elevate the reshus, but we may never go out to the reshus harabim, which is really what happens when you break any of the malachos. Amnon be'emes chiluk gadol between Isur Tchumen and other Isur Melechas Shabbos, which is connected also to the tying up or to the bowing up of the Nima. Yes, it's all about Hoitzah, but they're really the opposites. This is not a kasha. This is just a very important way of looking at this. Isur the Melechas Shabbos in Yonehu, that Sheba Asiyas Melacha Mechalal Huasa Shabbos. God forbid, if a person does what you may not do on Shabbos, you make a hole. A halal means you make a hole. You bring in the kedusha of Shabbos something unholy. Oisa chalal umakim panoi in Shabbos. Ubemela mischalal es kedushasa. It makes choil its kedush. Hainu sha'alidei melech Shabbos. What are you doing? It's not that you're going out. Punfaket. Being mechalal Shabbos means that you're taking an activity of the Reshus Harabim and you're bringing it into the Shabbos. You're being machnes something bilti ratzoi. You're being machnes klipan Shabbos. However, specifically Tchumen, Isur di Yitzia Chutz L'Tchum, ain't zeh shehu machnes inyan shel chol b'Shabbos. It's mamish the opposite. You're not bringing something that's unholy into the Shabbos. Ela adarabah. What you're doing here is that you're taking Shabbos and you're bringing it out to a place where it should not go. Hu meitzes Shabbos l'makim haklipas. Now, my friends, obviously, we want to expand kedusha, but there's a boundary to that. There is a place where we may not go. Even if a person is, as of now, called a bur or nama'aretz gamur, meir oir kedusha Shabbos, and if such a yid goes out chutz l'tchum of kedusha, harehu moitzei imoi. When he's going out, he's taking with him the kedusha of Shabbos that he always has in him, and he's placing it to a place of klippas. Now, the Rebbe points out on the brackets over here, don't we find that our inyan is dafka to expand kedusha? For example, aren't we supposed to add zman of Shabbos, tois Shabbos, both bichnisasa and b'yitziyasa? So here we are expanding the tchum of Shabbos. So says that Rebbe, the ein nidoin zedoim le'inyam toisvoi Shabbos milafanel umila acharel, which is in the parentheses adding Shabbos bisman. Why don't we say positively, go beyond your tchum? You are a Jew, Baruch Hashem, I'm a Jew. If we go out of the tchum, we're bringing kedusha out there to the world. Says the Rebbe, no. Ki Hassan, when it comes to toisvoi Shabbos, is HaTorah Tzifsa. The Torah commanded us, and therefore the Torah gave us the koyach to add from the time of the choil, not the any choil, but the ones that are already near Shabbos, and to transform it into Kedusha. God gave us that power, which is why we can do Ataka successfully. Masha'inkin, when we're going out of Chutz L'Tchum, Kivin Shemakim Zeh Nimsa, Makim Chutz L'Tchum de Kedusha, if we're speaking about going outside the boundaries of Kedusha, Makim HaKlipos, Asur La'achas by Kedusha Shabbos, Umi Kivin Shekein, Harei move on, that She'isura Shalitzah Chutz L'Tchum, Nimshach Kol Zman Shehi Yosisham. If a person goes beyond the Tchum, if I, God forbid, I'm taking my Kedusha, which is the Kedusha of a Yid, is called Shabbos, and we are putting it in a place of Klippa, now what? Come back as quick as you could. Every moment that you're staying there, you're continuing to do something wrong. Isn't only a one-time violation. And now that you went out, okay, it's done already. No. The problem is the effect that it has, which is that something holy is beyond its boundaries, that this person finds himself or herself chutz l'tchum. And whenever it's permitted, it has to be permitted. And here we're saying, like we explained, the 15 amos is the leeway. You have to go back. Not you may, you must. So it's all about keeping Kedusha and Klippa separated. But really, the Rebbe says, and from this angle, that going out of the Tchum is I can't bring holiness into a place of Klippa. And all of the other Isuri Shabbos is I can't take Klippa and bring it into a place of Kedusha. B'chol Hanal says that Rebbe, there is a hira, gam avodah sa'adam b'chlal. Ikir mitziyusei shel ish Yisraeli is my main mitzvah, is my godly soul, which is a chelik alikal mimal mamish. And therefore, Kamay Shakadosh Baruch Hu b'chveidu ba'atzmai is exalted. And he's be'ein aroich, even from God Almighty being the source of the creation of the world. Until Chazal tell us that the 10 statements through which God created the world, for God is called Milim Dehevyuta, commoners' words. Same thing is for the essence of every Yid. A Yid should remember that we are completely above the world. Eloma, why are we engaged in the world? Because God commanded us. And even when we do get engaged with the world, we have to do it as God does, which is that just like Hashem was mitzamtzem himself, in order for him to be the source of the worlds, a Yid Kaviyachol, a Yid Lahavdil should understand that we are Adam Elyon. And therefore we have to be mitzamtzem ourselves in order to be able to descend into the world. And therefore it's self-understood that while when a Yid is involved in Yoni Olam, Chayil Ba'olam, he knows that this is a tzimtzum, this is a lower min for him. But the Yid really always is connected to the Jews' essence, which is the level of Shabbos. Shabbos means that we are resting and we are completely b'menucha from all mundane activities. And therefore, b'meila, shnei hadinim b'Shabbos, like we mentioned, it's all connected to Haitzah. But these two sides of it, which is don't bring Klippa into Kedusha, don't place your holiness beyond where it belongs. Yesh v'hem ha'ira b'chlolos hanagasi shel kol Adam Yisrael, even during the weekdays, ki harei mohusay of a Yid is Shabbos, ho'iser darsias malachim is Shabbos, meaning in Yoni v'anagas ha'olam, which is hachnasas milei da'almen, Don't take mundane things into your head too much, because the head is the level of Shabbos. Hagam, that Torah commanded us, do your work. Okay, so do it. The external part that you have to invest in doing an action, that should be involved in your work. But your innermost, your pnimis dikakoiches, they have to remain holy and imbued for Torah and Avodah. And as it says in the pasuk, your hand should be the ones doing the hard work, not your heart and not your mind. But if a person, God forbid, brings too much of the world into his mind, then he makes a cholol, he makes a makam panui. That's the inner meaning of chilul Shabbos. From his ruchni is dike regesh. The ilu hoyo yodeo margesh emes. Because if a yid would have felt the truth, and that is that it is God's blessing that makes us wealthy, and all of our work is only to make a keli for God's bracha. As it says, a person would not put his head into his work by figuring out all different types of conniving ways. It won't help you. It's all about God's blessing. A suck of elu hamerubin, this too much investment in your work, which disturb you from Torah and Avodah, they actually don't allow the work that you have to be a proper keli for God's blessing. Even if a person is fulfilling that part of Shabbos, they're not bringing into Shabbos chilul. They're not being mechalol their Shabbos. They have to know something else. Tchumen, which is don't go beyond your tchum. Don't go beyond your tchum. In other words, even in your external koiches, which is invested in the world, stay within a boundary. Odsur losses beraglov, which Taka represents to begin with, koichosav hachitzonim, chutz liinyan hatoiro mitzvahs, ki hatoiro tzorech liyos arucha b'kol remachivorim. Valderech zeh b'zman hatfilo, v'asiyas hamitzvah, that the person certainly should not be going beyond the boundaries of that mitzvah. Says the Rebbe, the final seif tes v'hinei Mishnah achreina b'Masechtas ERUVIN, the final Mishnah that speaks about the laws of a sheretz that's found in the temple. Says the Rebbe that even after a yid is following all of the concepts of Shabbos and ERUVIN, like we explained above, say that you're not bringing into your inner part in Yoni Dechoil. Say that even your external part, your feet are not going beyond the boundaries of Kedusha. As long as we are in Golus, it's possible that Tumah should come into the temple, into our temple. It's not Tumah that's coming from you. You're holy. It came from out there somewhere. And since the world is not yet refined, because of the chumrius of the world, there's a possibility for there to be a sheretz in the Mikdash, even though you're not shaykh to it. And he's not at fault at all. Nevertheless, that's the last Mishnah. You are at the end. You did Shabbos. Shabbos means you did not bring klipa into your holy part. Eruvin means you did not go beyond your boundary. Still, the last Mishnah is beware. Sometimes a sheretz can come into your world. Now, what do you do? Not that it's your fault. What do you do? Get rid of it. There's a machlokes how to get rid of it. If, like we said, to get rid of it with your gartel, in other words, to engage with it, even though you're going to get dirtied, your levushim will become impure. As the Alter Rebbe says that when you struggle with someone who's dirty, you become dirty as well. And why are you doing that? Because you want to get it out as quick as possible. Or the other opinion is don't touch it. Don't even touch it with your garments. That's the sheet of Rabbi Yehuda. Get a wooden tongue and take it out with that. What does that mean? Not becoming tummy. So the Alter Rebbe is quoting from Tanya, where the Alter Rebbe says that you have to completely ignore it. Yasa atzmi kelo yedeya. To get to that level, it's going to take you time. But at least you're not going to become tummy. Mamish corresponding to Rabbi Yehuda. It's going to take you a while until you do the tikkun. Bottom line is, says the Rebbe, that we are right before the imminent arrival of Mashiach. And Chazal told us that that we should know that the power of tshuva it means all of us are shaykh to fulfill Shabbos and to fulfill Eruvin. Shabbos means not to bring in that which does not belong into our minds and hearts. Eruvin means not even to walk beyond our tchumen. And if something is found in our Mikdash, we have the koyach to get rid of it. Tziyazoi. That was through one moment of tshuva. Tshuva mi'ava. Mi'ava Rabba has the power to transform Tuma to Tahara. So it's Pashut says that Rebbe, that's a schus and the responsibility. Al kol echad levayed es ruach hatulam min haaretz through afatzas hamayon es chutza ulekarev ulemahir es ka'asimar bekarev mamish amein. Wow, ayasher koyach to all a mazel tov, and everyone is very much invited to join us, God willing, with the beginning of Masechtas Pesachim.
Koyach alai. Beautiful.
Wow.